Great. And oh, yes. So I want to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everyone like 1 minute to make it, although I know we have some overlap, but what I'll do is, as a preview for everyone, I decided with this one, I want to, like with all my previous talks in intelligent speech, what happens is, Q&A is just like a lot more fun for everyone and we learn a lot more. And we end up not having time for enough of it because I just blabbed at you for so long. And so many of the folks that come to this, that come to my talks have like, they've listened to Reconsider a bunch before, so I don't need to just like add a bunch of stuff that everyone's heard before. So I'm actually going to keep this brief. I'm going to keep the actual presentation brief. I want to like spend the time, you guys, you can listen to me on a podcast. You're here. We're live. We should be talking with each other more. So I want to spend the presentation just queuing up what like really interesting stuff we can talk about and then talk about it. So Max, you're going to be really busy today. Hope you've brought some water and good. And let's see if I can't get this party started. As usual, Max, let me know once I'm presenting effectively. I should be up now. Got it. Right. Thank you. So I'll give everyone a few seconds to do that. And we'll keep the slide deck short. So once we're done that, we'll transition over to like, pinning my beautiful face again. But the theme of this intelligent speech is escape. And so, of course, it's 2021. I have a great opportunity as a political scientist to talk about escaping this like seemingly inexorable, inevitable, horrible march towards civil war that the United States seems to be in. And so I want to talk first about like a little bit about what's the nature of the problem that we're facing. And it's, of course, like extremism in some ways, but it's a little more complicated than that, right? So, this is Chaz. Welcome to Chaz. Like, what is it? It's a violent insurrection in part of Seattle, right? Where a bunch of people decided that they were going to throw off the yoke of American law and law enforcement. This used to say police, it now says people. So it's of a left-wing flavor, this insurrection in Seattle. And and they took over like, 6 blocks or something like that. And, what they say, amnesty for all looters and rioters. So they were advocating for lawlessness, right? They were saying like, hey, there's certain forms of property destruction and violence that, and abolish the police. So I still don't know what happens after we abolish the police. But, but this was like a pretty scary time. And if you're of the right-wing persuasion, like this is your nightmare state, right? Like people deciding that they're going to like establish kind of a commune and that like law doesn't apply anymore. And that, who knows what they're going to do. But of course, Chaz burned itself out because it was always going to burn itself out. And then, of course, there was a different insurrection that happened a little bit later, about 7 months later, in which a bunch of right-wingers stormed the Capitol. We all know how that went. And clashed with police and tried to like, hunt down Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence. And, one of them got shot as they were trying to like break in and they killed a cop. And like, this was effed up. And, and for anyone that's like, oh, you're both sizing it, Eric. It's like, no, I'm not both sizing it. Like both of these are bad things. Right. And I think like part of the problem, like I want everyone to take a second to like search their hearts for like, did you sense any defensiveness about one of these, right? Did you sense like, wait, Eric, like you can't compare these two things together. Like the one that is my tribe was like actually noble and good, right? Like, let's think about Hong Kong for a second. I don't have a slide on it, but like the Hong Kong people there with their umbrellas, right? And like, cap of tear gas and like fighting the power, right? Like fighting the communist Chinese, like truly an abhorrent government. And we're all, Americans are all rooting for them, right? And so like you have people trying to resist the law, and they're like throwing bricks at the police stations and essentially trying to stop the Chinese government from enforcing its law in Hong Kong. They're committing insurrection, right? And we thought it was cool. We were like rooting for them, and they got crushed, of course. But but they felt like us. against the bad guys. And of course, like some of us look at Chaz and they're like, yes, this is good. This is like the people rising up against like the cops, and the cops are the bad guys and the people are the good guys. And some of us look at Chaz and we go, oh man, this is a bunch of like crazy left-winger anarchists, right? And like this was their plan the whole time, right? They don't want law, they want rioting, they want looting, right? They want these people to like run around and like steal stuff and burn things down. They're actually in favor of it. This is terrifying, right? And this is what left-wingers all want the whole time, right? Like the veil has finally come off. This is what the left wing wants. And then of course some people look at this and they go, they think that the election was stolen. It wasn't, but they think the election was stolen. And so so you have this, you have this system that has committed a coup. Right? There's been a coup. It's like, they feel like Putin has been put in power against like whoever the guy is that was like the one that people really want. And so they're like, they're rising up in a great American rebellious tradition and like fighting the power, right? And trying to make right what was wrong. And then you of course have people that look at this and go like, I'm more of the latter persuasion. I'm like, holy smokes, like this is terrible. This is real bad, right? Like we can't have people running in like trying to like do a people's arrest of Congress people and hang Mike Pence for, not helping like Donald Trump stay in power when he lost an election. Like that's bad. And ultimately like it kind of doesn't matter like who's worse. What matters is that we're hypocrites about it. This is actually our bigger problem, is that we're not, as Americans, we're not doing a good job right now of being against extremism. We're like advocating for extremism when it's our folks, because like it's good, because like the system doesn't work. When it's our side, like, like Black Lives Matter stuff, like the system doesn't work. We can't trust the police. We can't trust the court system. So what do we have to do? We have to put power in the people's hands. They have to burn things down, right? And they have to keep burning things down until, and now not everyone who's pro Black Lives Matter is pro rioting and looting, but there are some who are in fact pro rioting and looting, and what is it? The riot is the language of the unheard. And, we have to support these folks until the system is just. And then you have, of course, people on the right that, and they're great with that. But when like the right wing, when they agitate, when they do something like the Bundys, taking over some like bird watching station in a national forest, right? They're terrorists, right? Now they have guns, but they're terrorists. The Bundys were Al Qaeda. And then, of course, the right wing, just the opposite hypocrisy, that like, that like people who are like sick of cops murdering Black people, when they like, when they get feisty about it and like some stuff catches fire, it's like these people are terrorists, they're communists, they're anarchists, and like, their grievances are illegitimate. Our grievances are legitimate, and us taking over the Capitol is the necessary thing in order to defend, like the true democratic process against this, and unfortunately it's based on a lie. But if you believe the lie, well, if you actually believe that the election was stolen, right, and that like there was a coup and the wrong person is president, like that's, what is like, what's verboten anymore? And so our problem is that we're not, like, Americans aren't anti-extremism. We're anti the other side. And of course, we kind of knew that already, but like we're very uncomfortable with it. And when we get on social media, we do a great job of like defending our side and attacking the other side. And of course, look, hopefully a lot of you here have like already read Wedge, which I wrote, but like the big part of the big idea is like nobody's listening to you. Like if you're like loudly attacking the left wing or the right wing and defending your side, like nobody outside your little tribe is even listening to you. You're just talking to yourselves. And I don't want to repeat all this stuff that we've talked about on Reconsider, on Wedged, but this like downward spiral that's going on of like shrinking into these like deeper and deeper, entrenched war fighting camps, is going to continue, right? It's going to continue on its own. So I want to talk about like, why am I the person to talk about how we can escape this? Well, part of it is that like I've been thinking about this for like 8 years now. We wrote Wedge. Wedge was published back in 2014. So like long before political polarization and extremism was cool, right? This is like during the Obama years when I think a lot of people thought like, oh, this is like a small problem, and It's just like kind of like I don't know, like a couple of Republicans being a bit crazy. When of course, like the problem since we've written Wedge has just grown and grown and grown and grown and grown in exactly the way that we predicted it would, which is cool, but it's one of these places where I wish I was wrong. Like I didn't wish I was right. And I think the reason we had this insight was part because, like, I studied this at MIT. I got my bachelor's and master's in political science, and like it became an obsession of mine since the mid 2000s to like understand this better. People who've seen other talks know about like my background. I grew up in a conservative area, and then I moved to a liberal area, and I started to understand like just how much people caricaturize each other in ways that are deeply inaccurate. But like the ultimate problem that we're dealing with right now is that there's a warfighter mentality, right? And what's interesting is if you start to look at the rhetoric over time and the things that get people elected, it is more and more about defeating the tribe or the political party with the wrong color than it is about accomplishing something in particular. Not exclusively, but in part, and in larger and larger and larger part. Like ultimately, I think it's still like it's going to be a mystery for a long time, like why Republicans and conservatives abandoned so many of their values for Trump. So many things that were conventionally important to them for Trump. But like, I think Trump was better than anyone at just like dunking on Democrats constantly, right? And this hatred for Democrats that had been fostering, the Republicans found someone who expressed that better than anyone else, and made him president because there is this among the Republicans who tend to vote in primaries, which again, if you've read Wedge, like those are the most extreme versions of them. So the people who end up selecting who their candidate's going to be, because most people don't vote in primaries still. Like those folks are like genuinely terrified of Democrats, right? They think Democrats want to turn us into like a communist nightmare state, where like everyone's forced to be transgender or something. And Democrats same way, right? They're terrified of Republicans. And in fact, like Democrats are even more terrified of Republicans than Republicans are of Democrats. When we do polling, Democrats are just like a little bit ahead in the fear column. And like probably right now it's justified. Like there are more armed right-wing militias than there are left-wing militias. Although, if you count the rioting and looting that happened over the last year, like left-wing agitators have done more damage so far, but like right-wing militias seem like have the potential to do like a lot of damage. So basically, like what our politics has devolved into is like who is better at getting more of the electorate to show up out of fear of the other side. And like both sides have gotten really good at it. It's why we had this massive turnout in the 2020 election when like Joe Biden and Donald Trump like neither of them were all that popular. Donald Trump's approval rating was never all that high. Now the few people who liked him really, really liked him again, because like they painted him as this like defender of American values against like the onslaught from the Democrats, and the Democrats voted for Joe Biden, even though like a lot of them like would much have preferred Bernie Sanders. This is something that Democrats didn't do in 2016 because they weren't afraid enough, but now they're afraid enough of a second term of Donald Trump that they all closed ranks and they showed up in force to vote Donald Trump out. And they're like, okay, who do we pick from the nomination? I don't know. I don't care, but he's not Donald Trump. Let's go vote Donald Trump out. And that is going to continue to be the state of our politics going forward. And so a lot of people like recognize this as a problem, and like some people even want to solve it. And so like one way people want to solve it is like big kumbaya stuff, right? People keep trying to pull me into their latest kumbaya thing. And I keep resisting it because I think it's a complete waste of time, because it's not going to happen, because it's not addressing any root causes. It's one of those things like right now, I think a lot of people are like, yes, like I do want peace and harmony in society. So if only, if only the other side weren't so horrible, like it would be fine, right? If only like everyone agreed with me, it would be fine. And like, I'm sure people even being rankled by me saying that because there are people like even listening to this talk, they're like, but it is the other side, Eric. And of course, like, so there's people who are like, oh, it really is the other side. It's like one of the solutions they propose is like, we just need to crush the extreme versions of our opposition, and then it will be okay, right? And do it with violence. Let's just like be open about the fact that we're going to decide who the Nazis are, or who the communists are, or who the anarchists are. and we're just going to run around and punch them and like and intimidate a group that we've decided is beyond the pale into oblivion, and hope that works out. If you've listened to any of our historical episodes about Weimar Republic or about the Roman Republic and how those both fell, they fell from people running around punching each other. So this will definitely not work. It will definitely end. It will 100% guaranteed end in a Caesar or a Hitler taking over. Let's not do that. And then other people are like waiting for a hero, right? They're waiting for like the next JFK, the next great uniter to come along. But of course, the next great uniter is not going to come along because of how we vote. Because like the primary system is going to select more people like Donald Trump. And it becomes harder and harder to select like a great uniter because that great uniter doesn't speak to the like hardened partisans in a given party that vote in those primaries. So like we're not going to get another JFK. And like part of the other problem is that I get involved in some like party politics every now and then. Not involved, but like kind of like as an advisor. And the parties are actually like having trouble recruiting charismatic young people to even like join the party anymore that aren't crazy, right? You've got charismatic young people that are crazy, like Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever her name is, like Jewish space laser lady. Like she's nuts. And you can get her, but you can't get a JFK because people like JFK, if JFK were alive today, JFK would be like, F politics, I'm going to Silicon Valley and going to start a startup because this is nuts, right? Because like I can't make progress and it's just going to be miserable. And so we can't just wait for a hero to come save us. Right now, what we are experiencing is this sort of Cold War. And like one of the things we know from the Cold War is that it's a great uniter. And so like the structural cause behind what's going on here is a very sort of, I guess, heightened is the word. We have a very heightened in-group, out-group theory problem going on. So we talk about this in political science a lot. In-group, out-group theory it probably comes from our evolutionary days, like my group good, your group bad, because it's different. There's even an experiment done in like the 70s with like a classroom where a teacher just like arbitrarily broke up students into like more like brown-eyed and more like blue-green-eyed groups. And like they started going at it, right? Arbitrarily broken up, but they started coming up with why like people with brown eyes were bad or people with green eyes were bad. So like as soon as you create a division between people and like find a way to divide them or to define yourselves as different from someone else, like you're going to start hating that other group. It's just part of your nature and you just need to be ready to deal with this fact. But the thing about this in-group out-group theory is that it unites the in-group, right? So like one of the reasons the Cold War analogy is so interesting is that during the Cold War, like Americans were quite united. It was like the age of consensus. Right. And like if you've read Wedge or done any of other talks, like you see these, like you can even see maps. I don't have it in this, but you see maps of Republicans and Democrats like voting together in Congress, God forbid, constantly. Why? Because we were united. Why are we united? Because we just got done with the Second World War and we just started the Cold War where the United States is like the American way is the thing. Superman was our hero, right? Our representative, truth, justice, and the American way was Superman's thing, right? Crazy to think of now. But we had this unified identity of like, yeah, we have a lot of disagreements, right? Like this was like, there was like Vietnam and there was the civil rights movement and there were a lot of like violent protests and people getting shot by police, but we still had this idea that we're all Americans because by God, we're not Soviets, all right? We're not communists. And so that binding us together, having that out-group, having that villain. It's one of the reasons I like Watchmen as a comic book so much that like, I'm going to spoil it. So like cover your ears if you want to read it soon. But the thing Ozymandias is such a genius about is like the thing that's going to unite the world and keep it from nuking itself is having an external enemy, right? So like in the comic book, it's an alien. In the movie, I think more cleverly, it's Dr. Manhattan. They create a fear of an outsider, and that creates unity. So this is going on in the U.S. right now. Fear of the outsider, fear of the other party is creating unity, where Where in the Cold War, it was fear of an outsider rather than an inside outsider that created unity. It's fear of these guys. And for good reason. And so one potential solution is let's have another external enemy, which we've like kind of tried to do, but we're not good at. So like we've tried to kind of make it China. Like actually one thing Americans agree on is that like China's awful. It's one of like the few things we can agree on. So like they could become that, but like Cold Wars are bad. So let's try to avoid that. So what can we do? Right? We have to go after structural change because there is a structural cause of our extremism. And now you might be thinking like, well, Eric, it's always been, I'm chewing up a lot of time. Cool. Thank you. Eric, it's always been, what's the word? There's always been a group out group theory, right? We've always been tribal animals. So like what made it worse? Short version is like technology has made it worse and techniques have made it worse. So they just amplified it. So we actually we can't put the genie back in the bottle, like the social media genie back in the bottle. So we have to do something else. And the short version is what we need is more options. And the reason is, if you have like 7 legit options, like the red party or like the purple party can't win on just trying to dunk on the other 6 parties and talk about why the other 6 parties are bad. It's just too much energy. You actually have to talk about why the 7th party is good, or why the purple party is good, or why the orange party is good. But we can't have that right now in the United States because of Diverger's law. It's a first past the post single. In a first past the post, which is what we do, you just like vote for one person in one district, you're going to get 2 parties to dominate. It's just like that kind of natural way of things. Now, some people might be wondering but in Canada, it's slightly different, and the UK, it's slightly different. We can talk about why there's some slight differences, but in the United States, as long as we keep voting the way that we're voting, we're only going to have 2 options, and the dominant strategy is going to be dunking on the other party and making you afraid of the other party in order to turn out the vote. So, how do we get past that? I have, in my 8 years of working on this, the only thing that seems like it is at all plausible as a path out is ranked choice voting. Because ranked choice voting, I'm going to talk about how ranked choice voting very quickly, how it incentivizes multi-party systems so that we get past this dunking strategy into here's why you need to vote for me strategy. Right? So you need to change the incentives for politicians to use more vote for me and here's why, as opposed to vote against the other guy and here's why. And the way you have to do that is you have to change how we vote because of Duberger's law. That's the big idea. So real quick, how does ranked choice voting work? Well, what happens is you actually vote for multiple people, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And so what happens is they count up all the votes, and then the person with the least votes, their votes get redistributed, and then the next person with the least votes, their votes get redistributed until you have a winner. And so in the first past the post system, Orange would have won here with 35% of the vote. That's not much, but it turns out a lot of people really liked purple as their second choice, was their second favorite candidate, a good, kind of compromise candidate that everyone can get along with. So a lot of, some people, about a third of people really, really like Orange, but most people are good enough with purple that we can just move on. Right. So if you look back at 2016, we saw polling that put Stein at 4% and Johnson at 10% because people didn't really like these two a lot. A lot of Americans didn't like these folks a lot. But Stein actually got less than 1% of the vote, and Johnson got, I think, maybe 3%, which was crazy for a third party candidate. But of course, when people say you're going to waste your vote voting for Johnson, it's true in a first past the post system. You are going to waste your vote voting for Johnson or Stein, so you don't. Even though people prefer these folks, you don't. Right. And so that's why third parties will never work until you change the system. So, for example, let's imagine I'm a never Trump Republican. I can vote for Gary Johnson. He was a Republican in New Mexico. Bill Weld was a Republican in Massachusetts. Let's do this. Right. I can vote for them first. But right now I won't because maybe I don't like Trump, but I like Clinton even less. So I'm going to vote for Trump to prevent Clinton because this is a waste of my vote. But if in a ranked choice voting system, I can vote Johnson, then Clinton, then Trump. So if then Trump, then Clinton. So if Johnson loses, at least I'm not voting for Clinton by mistake or helping Clinton by mistake. And it allows people to vote for these third party candidates such that we can have a big multi-party system. And there's all sorts of complications that come up from this, especially in the American system about what would have to change if we had 4 parties in, let's say these were the 4 parties that were represented in Congress. It would change a lot of stuff, but we actually have good models that have helped us, that can like help guide the way a little bit. And like Ireland is a great one. They have these like multi-party districts with ranked choice voting. And like you never, ever, ever have a majority of just one group. Fine Gael and Fine Féin, they're the dominant parties, but like, you know, Green, Sinn Féin, Labour, Social Democrats, they all do pretty well sometimes, and they all like end up in government. You have to have these big compromises. And like generally speaking, the Irish actually really like their system as far as I can tell. So this is like basically their Congress, this is their Senate. You never have someone that just like owns the whole thing. You've got to put together a coalition that represents like a very large majority of people, rather than like, oh, the guy that got like 45% of the vote now like controls everything. So that's actually the whole presentation. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna just abruptly end so that we can get to Q&A. Oh boy. Okay. So I'll keep this quick because I actually don't have a good answer, and it is. I've like tried to do kind of like politics therapy in the past, and I've actually failed at it. So I feel like I'm not good at it. Because part of the problem is like there are some. It depends like how bad it is. Like your QAnon aunt or uncle, like they're kind of gone, right? The problem is like QAnon is a like just full-fledged crazy conspiracy theory with like lizards and Jews running the world somehow and pedophiles. And if people are saying like, oh, that's totally true, like there's not much you can do. But if it's just like, oh, the Democrats are evil and they're scary, or like the Republicans are evil and they're scary, like my very brief advice is you need to acknowledge some of it. Right. So, for example, I think a lot of places that people go wrong is they go like hardcore. I have to defend everything because if I give the other side any points, they're gonna be like, aha, I was right and you were wrong. Right. And so like this is what like I think gets normal people to defend stuff like rioting and looting, like burning down city blocks. Right. Like, oh, no, this is actually good somehow. Like you can't be upset at these, upset at the people doing this. Or like it gets people to defend, I don't know, anything Donald Trump has ever done because like, I can't legitimize your fear. But I think like we actually need to accept that there is some scary stuff going on. Like I don't want anyone, whatever they're protesting, coming by and burning down San Mateo. I just don't. Right. And if someone's like, oh, no, like like that's actually a good thing. You shouldn't be upset about it. Like you've lost me. You've immediately lost me. And so I think we need to like acknowledge what is really scary. And then but then like once we've done that and like someone feels heard, I think we can then talk about like what is the thing you're actually worried about and like who are those people and are they everyone, and like do a little flip the script, right? Like maybe you've got a Republican who is like really afraid of Black Lives Matter, right? And you can say like, okay, but like, are you, for example, someone who would like attack the Capitol and like try to hang Mike Pence? And they'd be like, oh, of course not. Those people are crazy. They don't represent us at all. And you go, cool. Maybe there are Democrats or like people who support Black Lives Matter who don't support burning down whole city blocks. Do you think that could be possible? Right. And like, then you can start to get people to go like, oh, like I feel stereotyped and like lumped in with like, I'm not a Nazi. Right? Like I'm tired of people calling me a Nazi. It's like, cool, maybe some of the Black Lives Matter supporters are tired of being called anarchist looters because there are some Nazis and there are some anarchist looters, but is it everyone? And so like, I think that's like the angle that I've seen have any hope of working. Nice. Nice. Yeah. Good question. That's I love that because it's very like how do I fix my own house rather than like how do I get someone else to fix theirs. To some extent, like I think it depends how extreme. Like I think to some extent, ideally we want to like leave some extremists behind. Like for example, like the actual QAnon conspiracy theorists, like I think they just need to like they either just need to like shrink into so tiny a bubble that like they can't interface with the real world anymore and they just kind of like fall over and die, or like they need to get like crushed by reality, or like their ideas do, not the people. But their ideas need to be like crushed by reality, and they have to go through this like, I mean, they need like deep level therapy at that point. Unfortunately, like rehabilitating people from conspiracy theories and cults is actually really hard. But like, let's put the cultists aside. The folks that the folks that, it depends like what kind of extreme. Is it extreme fear or extreme ideas? Extreme fear, we talked a little bit about that, but extreme ideas, again, it's hard, but I think the place you'd start is by asking them, like, what do we like? Two main questions. One of them is like, what do we really want? Right? You have these extreme ideas such as abolish the police, right? No police ever. What do we really want? Right? What is the goal of that? Right? And like, what are the other things we want in addition to that goal? It's like, oh, I don't want cops to kill an American citizen ever again. I would love that too. Great. What are the other things we also want? How do we feel about the violence that's going on right now? Like all the other people that are being killed by violence from people that aren't police. Like, what do we want to do to protect them? Let's try to build something. Like, let's get crazy. Blue sky thinking here. What would we build from the ground up, you and me, to protect Americans from each other and from the state and from, rocks falling on their heads and like, and car accidents and stuff like that. Like, and are certain deaths worse than others? Like, get people thinking about what they really want. And then I also think like, this one's really hard because people get very defensive really fast, but get to a vision where you agree. Like, that's what you need to do is like, because I think like you can do that with anyone. Like, I'm not a communist, but like I can agree with the communist, like a communist vision if I work with them long enough of like, oh, I want a world where like nobody's hungry and like everyone like has an opportunity to like, do great work and like contribute to society. And they're like proud of, they're proud of what they do and they all have homes and nobody's homeless. I'm like, that sounds great. I'm all for it. Right. But like, if we're talking to the communists, we tend to go like, well, like we don't even give them the time of day to like paint this vision that we would agree with, because we're afraid that if we say, I agree, I don't want a world with homeless people, then they're gonna be like, aha, you gotta be communist. It's the only way, right? The only way to do it is to have the government provide housing for everyone. And I don't have to agree with that, even though I want nobody to be homeless. And so I think like once we get ourselves in there, we can start just talking about like the feasibility of it, right? And working through like someone's crazy idea of either like abolish the police or like a right-wing version is I don't know, God, there's so many, but like that Donald Trump lost the election, but just should just stay in power anyway, right? Like that's a thing some people thought. And probably still think. And if we're talking to them about that, what we might want to talk about is the consequences. And so like often what I see in people who are extreme is they go, oh, I want the people who represent what I think to have special powers to be able to do something. So like I want to give Donald Trump special powers to like stay in office, even though the Electoral College voted to kick him out. Right? It's like, oh, cool. What happens when it's not Donald Trump anymore? Right? Do we want Barack Obama to have that power? Do we want Hillary Clinton to have that power? And they'll be like, well, okay, maybe not. And so like I like to bring people back to process, where we go like, hey, we've got to keep in mind that whatever power or whatever process we choose to accomplish X is going to keep being used in the future. And this is like the essence of liberalism, right? The essence of liberalism, like moderate liberalism, is that the process really matters. And like we have to be willing to accept that our outcomes won't always happen because we want a process that prevents really bad outcomes from happening. And I think that can help with extremism, that like, yeah, you can still want, like, we can still want this vision that like, I may not even, I'll partially agree with, but I'll agree with. Exactly. Yeah. Totally. I wish my table wasn't so shaky, but I think so you're recognizing something that I think is a like kind of common phenomenon that when we really interrogate ourselves, we see ourselves doing, which is in order to, I'm just going to reflect what you just said, right? In order to conform with the tribe and defend the tribe, because we see the tribe as the only path to accomplishing what we want. Right, like for example, if we want to like defend an ability of a woman's right to like get an abortion, or if we want to stop the baby murder, right? Like depending on our perspective on it, right? Like Like there's one big group with a lot of power that can like help us do that, and so we need to like defend them, right? We need to like help them. But it is like it's actually really hard to, in order to like be a good supporter and advocate. Couple things are happening. One, it's just like the mental gymnastics to like I disagree with a lot of what you think, but I'm going to support you anyway is hard. But like the harder part, to your point, is that the United States has had a Puritan revival, where I don't necessarily just mean Puritan Christianity. I just mean Puritan whatever, where like in order to be like a good left winger, right? Like you've got to be pure, right? Or a good right winger, you've got to be pure. And what has happened to both of like the dominant loudspeaker parts of both of these tribes is that the like purist, it's like with any revolution, like the Robespierres have taken over, right? I say French Revolution allegory, which I don't have time to explain, unfortunately, but the Robespierres have taken over, where like, for example, if I'm a Republican but I like don't like Trump, then I'm not a Republican. Well, it's like, hold on, like there's like I like George Bush and I like Mitt Romney and I like John McCain and I like and I like Ronald Reagan, right? But I'm not a Republican anymore. And then the same thing about like certain like social justice ideas in the left. Like if you're not on board, like you're just not a good Democrat. You're actually really regressive and like quite possibly a Nazi. And again, according to these people who are a small minority but have a big loudspeaker, so we feel this pressure to conform to them. So anyway, how do you deal with that? That part I actually don't know, because like I don't know how to like win from the inside of a party. I think like to some extent you've got to like the best advice I have right now is to internally keep your emotional distance from what's going on around you. Because I think like right now what's going on in party politics is too big for any of us, is why like my suggestion for change is structural, right? We just got to change the way we vote, smash the two-party system, replace it with a multi-party system, change the incentives, because like this will continue to happen. And so like my best advice is to like kind of keep your head down. And like I'll share a secret about my life. There are a select group of friends that know exactly what I think about politics, but most people most of the time don't. And I've been very selective about like who I let in. And I think this is actually very common, but most people aren't willing to say it until they're my close friend and trust me enough. But I think like most people, they get around the kitchen table with the people close to them and they say like, man, this is a little crazy, right? All this is a little crazy, even in my own party. But I don't feel comfortable saying anything because like there will be like a social media storm to like come chop me down. So I think actually most people feel that way. They just like most people aren't in power because there isn't like those most people like me. Like I have like these scattered ideas that don't fit in a box well, just like probably most of you, just like most Americans. And so we can't say like, this is what we stand for and get people to be like, yep, this entire slate of things, this is exactly what we stand for. And it's very simple, like abolish the police, right? Very simple, right? It won't work, but it's very, very simple. And so like, I can repeat this very, very loudly. Whereas like the counter concept of like, whoa, like probably abolishing the police won't really work because like, yes, I know you say that like the police only come after the crime, but like deterrence is the thing. And if we look at like Better Angels of Our Nature and other studies throughout history, like the centralization of authority is actually like really key to preventing crime. And like crime in the United States and the Western world is very low, in part due to central government authority and its ability to exert power, right? And like use violence. And like history shows that. So like the police are actually really important, as flawed as they are, right? Because like, but like, so what do we actually want to do? I don't even know, but like, we have to do a bunch of experiments to understand, like, do we bust up police unions, or like, do we do training, or like, do we actually like, like change what they're, like add other services and like change what they're, all this stuff. Like, you can't put that on a sign. And yeah, someone heard my printing press piece. Okay. So since there's 1 minute, should I jump over